He didn't explain anything. He threw the transfer papers onto my desk. The folder hit the wood with a sharp crack, loud enough that several heads lifted, then immediately turned back to their screens. "Effective Monday," he said, voice flat, satisfied. "You're relocating to Northfield Branch." The rain hammered against the windows of Meridian Financial's downtown office, matching the pressure building behind my ribs. Northfield. Everyone knew the name. The branch scheduled for closure. The place careers were sent to finish quietly. "That branch closes in 15 days, I said, keeping my voice steady while 20 pairs of eyes pretended not to watch. He leaned closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "Think of it as an opportunity to broaden your experience." The smirk told the real story. My fingers tightened around the paper. Northfield employees had received their closure notice weeks ago. Customers had already been informed. Equipment removal was scheduled. This wasn't a transfer. It was an execution. The reasons sat between us, unspoken but obvious to anyone who'd attended last week's quarterly review. I had questioned his decision to abandon long-standing middle-market clients in favor of chasing polished, high-net-worth optics. I'd brought data, projections, history. I'd made him look unprepared. Now he was returning the favor. "The branch manager leaves tomorrow," he added. "Already standing. You take over Monday. HR's copied. Non-negotiable. By evening." Rain soaked through my coat at the bus stop. 8 years of 60-hour weeks, missed holidays, postponed vacations, all erased with a single violent gesture. Monday arrived with cruel sunshine. Northfield Branch sat in a tired strip mall between a vacant storefront and a discount shoe shop. The sign was sun-bleached. One letter flickered. "Inside." 5 employees looked up in confusion. No one had told them I was coming. "I'm Eleanor Brooks," I said, setting my box down. "Apparently." "I'm your new manager." A woman with gray-streaked hair approached. "Karen," she said, 16 years here. "Didn't know they were sending anyone. Seems pointless. By lunch." The picture was clear. This branch hadn't failed. It had been slowly strangled. That night, I spread a city development map across my table, and something finally clicked. Northfield wasn't dying. It was sitting 4 blocks from the fastest-growing business district in the city, and headquarters had completely missed it. They thought they'd sent me to close a branch. What they didn't realize was that they had given me 15 days. How are you feeling right now? If this moment stirred something familiar, take a second to straighten the space around you. Even just clearing one small thing can make the mind feel lighter. Let me know where you're listening from. I read every comment, and if you want to stay with me for what comes next, subscribe, because the next move wasn't emotional. It was calculated. Northfield didn't look like a place worth saving. The carpet was worn thin in the high-traffic areas. The computers hummed like relics from another decade. A stack of outdated brochures sat untouched near the entrance. Their colors faded from years of fluorescent light. But what struck me most wasn't the decay. It was the people. 5 employees. All still here. All still working not out of optimism, but habit, loyalty, survival. Karen handed me a binder after lunch. "These are the exit surveys." She said, "Corporate never asked for them back." Most customers wrote the same thing in different handwriting. Regret, confusion. Why are you closing? Some had banked here for decades. Some were retirees. Some were first-generation business owners who didn't trust downtown branches that treated them like numbers. By mid-afternoon, I'd pieced together the pattern. Technology upgrade requests had been denied for 3 straight years. Marketing funds cut. Business outreach roles eliminated. Northfield hadn't underperformed. It had been intentionally sidelined. Karen explained it plainly. 3 years ago, regional leadership decided this wasn't the right demographic anymore. That phrase again, right demographic. That night, sleep refused to come. I spread files and reports across my kitchen table. But it was the city development map, folded and forgotten in my bag, that pulled my attention back. I smoothed it out slowly. tracing familiar streets. And then I saw it. Northfield Branch sat 4 blocks from the River Point district, the city's fastest-growing redevelopment zone. Old warehouses converted into startup offices, small manufacturers, local service companies, dozens of new business licenses issued in the past year alone. I opened my laptop, checked zoning updates, business permits, economic reports. My pulse picked up. River Point had exploded quietly, and Meridian Financial wasn't there. The next morning, I arrived early. Karen was unlocking the door when I met her outside. "How many River Point businesses bank with us?" I asked. She didn't hesitate. "None." We tried flagging it. They cut the business development role instead. That was the moment everything shifted. This wasn't about saving my position. It was about proving something fundamental had been missed. At lunch, I gathered the team in the break room. No speeches, no false promises. "They think we're already finished," I said. "But there's an opportunity sitting 4 blocks away that no one at headquarters has seen or chosen to see." Skepticism filled the room, understandably. "And what happens if we succeed?" one of them asked. "They'll still close us." "Maybe," I said. "But then they'll have to explain why." Silence followed. Then Karen spoke, quietly. "If you're serious, we'll help." I nodded. "We have 15 days, not to survive. To be undeniable." We didn't announce anything. No emails, no proposals to headquarters, no heroic speeches about saving the branch. We worked. The first rule was simple: nothing through official channels, unless absolutely necessary. Northfield was already marked for closure, which meant oversight was lazy, automated, and mostly symbolic. As long as numbers didn't spike suddenly, no one would look too closely. I split the work carefully. Karen and Raj handled existing customers steady, predictable, loyal. Their job was to keep things calm, normal, invisible, familiar faces, familiar routines. I focused on River Point, not with glossy presentations or corporate pitches. I walked, I listened. I introduced myself as a local branch manager who was temporarily assigned nearby. That phrase mattered. It made people talk freely. What I heard was consistent. Startups were tired of driving across the city for basic banking. Small manufacturers wanted someone who understood cash flow cycles, not just credit scores. Service businesses needed flexibility, not polished indifference. They weren't asking for favors. They were asking to be taken seriously. Back at Northfield, I built profiles late into the evening. Not pitches, use cases. What each type of business needed. What Meridian already had the infrastructure to offer. And where the gaps were being artificially created by policy. By the end of the 3rd day, I was certain of one thing. This branch wasn't unprofitable. It was inconvenient to the narrative. On Thursday morning, the first obstacle arrived. An automated notice popped up on my screen. Temporary restrictions applied due to pending branch closure. Transaction limits lowered. Approval thresholds tightened. It was subtle, quiet, procedural. Karen noticed immediately. "They're shrinking us without saying it." I nodded. "They want us harmless." So we adjusted. Instead of processing everything here, we became the front end, relationship builders, paperwork collectors, conversations that mattered. Actual approvals quietly flowed through contacts at other branches' managers who still answered my calls, who disliked what Meridian had become. Nothing illegal, nothing traceable, just cooperation. By the end of the first week, we had 6 new River Point businesses fully onboarded. Small wins, nothing dramatic. Then something changed. People started mentioning us by name. The Northfield team, the branch that actually shows up. One afternoon, a local cafe owner brought in 3 other business owners and sat them down without asking permission. "Talk to her," he said, pointing at me. "She listens." That night, I stayed late, reviewing numbers alone in the dim office, and that's when the email arrived. Mandatory closure training, daily attendance required, effective immediately. I didn't need to read between the lines. They had noticed movement. I closed my laptop slowly. If they wanted to accelerate the ending, then we would accelerate the proof. If you leave here, you will miss the most important thing. The training sessions were designed to drain people. Windowless conference rooms, scripted slides, euphemisms masquerading as strategy, customer transition efficiency, resource reallocation, career mobility pathways. They never used the word closure on the first afternoon. He acknowledged me without looking up from his tablet. Settling in at Northfield. Eleanor, he asked lightly. Educational experience. I met his gaze. Very. The satisfaction in his voice told me everything I needed to know. While Karen and I sat through mandatory lectures, the rest of the team stayed behind at the branch officially to assist customers with transition questions. Unofficially, they kept working by midweek. The pressure escalated. Cash handling limits dropped again. Loan approvals slowed to a crawl. The internet connection went down twice. Maintenance issues. None of it accidental. On Thursday morning, an IT contractor arrived unannounced and began disconnecting 2 terminals. System updates, he said. Avoiding eye contact. Orders from regional by noon. Half our systems were offline. Karen didn't bother lowering her voice. They're cutting our legs out. I called the team into the empty conference room. No panic, no dramatics. They won't say stop. I said, they want us to quit. Silence followed. Then one of the younger associates spoke. What if we don't need their systems? The question hung in the air. Old habits kicked in, paper forms, manual checklists, handwritten notes, slow but functional. We became a relay instead of a processor. Information flowed outward. Approvals came back through people who still remembered what this company used to be. Clumsy, inefficient, effective. By Friday, word reached me quietly. Regional oversight had flagged Northfield for irregular activity. That night, another email arrived. Closure date moved up. All operations cease Monday. Mandatory inventory Sunday morning. I read it twice. They weren't just accelerating the timeline. They were trying to erase evidence. When I shared the news, the room went still. So that's it. Someone said, we tried. Karen put a hand on my arm. You gave us something to believe in. I shook my head. Not yet. Inventory meant paperwork, records, final tallies. It also meant a deadline. If they think Sunday ends this, I said slowly, then Sunday is when we make it impossible to ignore. Karen studied me. You have something in mind. I do. I replied, but it means we stop playing defense, outside. The branch sign flickered in the evening light. Inside, the trap was already taking shape. Sunday arrived earlier than it should have. I was awake before the alarm, staring at the ceiling, replaying the email in my head. Mandatory inventory. Operations cease Monday. The language was clean, administrative, designed to sound inevitable. By the time I reached Northfield, the parking lot was already half full. Boxes stacked near the entrance, clipboards on the counter. 2 unfamiliar faces from regional oversight stood near the door, pretending to be polite. He arrived 10 minutes later. He didn't greet anyone, just walked in, scanned the room, and nodded, once satisfied. This was the moment he'd planned. Closure as performance? Let's make this efficient. He said, we're on a schedule. We were, just not his. Inventory forced everything into one-place files. Numbers. Histories. It turned weeks of quiet effort into something physical. And that mattered. While regional staff checked off assets, Karen and I moved through the branch, answering questions calmly, deliberately, every interaction documented, every instruction repeated aloud. We gave them nothing emotional, only process. By mid-morning, one of the auditors frowned at his tablet. These account totals don't match last quarter's projections. I kept my voice neutral. They wouldn't. Those projections assumed 0 new business. He looked up, and that changed significantly. He hesitated, then continued checking boxes. That was the pattern. No confrontation. No objections. Just quiet discrepancies stacking up. At noon, he pulled me aside. "You should know the board is meeting tonight," he said, lowering his voice. "Regional performance review." I nodded. I assumed as much. His eyes narrowed. He hadn't expected that. When the inventory ended, keys were collected, access cards surrendered, final signatures completed, to anyone watching. Northfield was finished, but as we stood outside in the afternoon light, something shifted. Karen looked at me. Now what I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder thicker than the one he'd thrown at me weeks earlier. "Now," I said, "we make them look. Inside were projections, growth models, signed interest forms from River Point businesses, not promises, commitments. Independent, verifiable, not through Meridian systems. Beyond them. We weren't presenting to him, or to regional leadership. We were going above the noise." That evening, as the board convened downtown, something else happened quietly across the city. Emails went out, calls were returned, names were recognized. By the time the meeting began, the story they planned to tell was already incomplete. I didn't attend. I didn't need to, because sometimes the most effective move is letting others realize they've been missing the wrong numbers all along. And this is where things get weird. I learned later that the board meeting started exactly on time. What I didn't know then was how quickly the room changed once the first slide went up. He began the presentation the way he always did, confident, rehearsed, framed around efficiency, branch consolidations, cost savings, strategic focus. Northfield appeared on the screen as a completed line item, clean, final. Then the questions started, not accusations, clarifications. Why does this region show an unexpected uptick in small business inquiries over the last 2 weeks? He paused. Just long enough. Residual activity, he said smoothly. Noise before closure. Another board member leaned forward. Then, why do we have independent projections showing first-year revenue exceeding $2 million from that same location? Silence. Those numbers weren't supposed to exist. He adjusted his tone. Those figures aren't from our systems. That's correct, the CFO replied. They were submitted directly, with documentation, across the city. I sat at my kitchen table, phone face down, untouched, waiting. I'd sent nothing dramatic, no expose, no emotional appeal, just data to the people who cared about it. Signed interest forms, revenue models, third-party verification. Numbers don't argue. They accumulate. At Northfield, the team gathered at Karen's apartment, not to celebrate, to wait. The television murmured in the background. Untouched. No one checked their phone. Then mine buzzed. One message, unknown number. When did this River Point activity start? I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. 15 days ago, when Northfield was declared irrelevant. Minutes passed. Then another message. Why wasn't regional leadership aware? I didn't answer immediately. Some questions deserve silence. Across town. The meeting slowed, slides skipped, assumptions questioned. What had been presented as a clean closure now looked premature. Someone asked about the accelerated timeline. Someone else asked why system access had been restricted mid-initiative. The answers didn't land the way they were meant to by the time the meeting adjourned. Nothing had been decided. That alone was a shift. Later that night, my phone rang. This time, the number wasn't hidden. Eleanor. The voice said, calm, measured. This is the office of the CFO. We need to speak tomorrow morning. I glanced around the room. Karen met my eyes, reading my expression. Is that good? She asked quietly. It's not bad, I replied, which means something broke. The call ended. I didn't smile, because this wasn't resolution. It was attention, and attention, in the wrong moment, can be far more dangerous than silence. The call with the CFO's office was scheduled for 8 the next morning. No calendar invite, no agenda, just a time. That alone told me this wasn't procedural, it was reactive. I arrived early, notebook closed, phone on silent. The receptionist didn't ask me to sign in. She already knew who I was. That detail stayed with me. The CFO didn't waste time. "We've reviewed the materials you submitted," he said. Fingers steepled. Voice neutral. "They weren't part of any official reporting structure." "No," I replied. "They weren't meant to be." A pause. Calculated. "You understand that bypassing regional leadership creates complications." "I understand," I said evenly. That regional leadership had 15 days to acknowledge the data and chose not to. He watched me closely, not with anger, with assessment. "Why didn't you escalate sooner? Because escalation assumes someone is listening," I thought. Instead, I said, because the branch was already scheduled for closure. Any internal escalation would have been filtered. He nodded once. That answer fit. What he didn't say but didn't deny mattered more. By the time I left the building, the temperature had shifted, not warmer, sharper. That afternoon, Karen called. "They've frozen our final payroll processing," she said quietly. "HR says it's under review." Of course it was. Pressure doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps. Then came the email. Notice of internal audit. Scope Northfield branch activities. Timeline immediate. They weren't looking for fraud. They were looking for leverage. I gathered the team that evening. No panic. No raised voices. Just facts. "They're going to examine everything," I said. Emails, logs, approvals. Not to understand what we did, but to decide who controls the narrative. "So what do?" someone asked. "We stop playing defense," I said again. "And we stop acting like this is about Northfield." I laid out the documents on the table. Copies, not originals. External confirmations. Third-party timestamps. Every step we'd taken had been mirrored outside Meridian systems. "They can audit what they own," I continued. "They can't erase what exists beyond them." Karen exhaled slowly. "You planned for this. I planned for interference." I corrected. The audit team arrived 2 days later. Polite, thorough, curious in the way people are when they already suspect something isn't where it should be. They asked about approval routing. They asked about system restrictions. They asked about the accelerated closure date. Each answer led to another question. Not of us. Of regional leadership. By the end of the week, something subtle happened. The questions stopped coming to Northfield. They started going upward. That's when my phone rang again. Same number as before. "Eleanor," the CFO said. "We need to discuss next steps." I didn't ask what those were, because when an organization stops asking what went wrong and starts asking who decided this, the damage has already moved. The meeting was scheduled for late afternoon, not on the executive calendar, not in any conference room I recognized. A quiet floor, frosted glass. No nameplate? That was intentional. When I walked in, the CFO was already seated. 2 others joined him, legal and operations. No regional leadership, no familiar allies, just people who dealt in consequences. "We've concluded the preliminary audit," the CFO said. "And we have concerns." I nodded. "I assumed you would." Legal slid a folder across the table. Thinner than expected. "Your actions at Northfield were unconventional," she said carefully. But they weren't unauthorized. That word landed heavily. Operations leaned forward. "What concerns us is the sequence, the system restrictions, the accelerated closure, the lack of disclosure upward." I didn't respond. Silence lets people hear themselves. "The question," the CFO continued, "is whether this was negligence or intent." There it was. Not what happened. Who decided? I spoke slowly. Northfield was closed to validate a strategy. Not because it failed. The moment it stopped fitting the narrative, it was managed out. No one interrupted. Legal tapped the folder. "We've cross-checked timestamps. Several restriction requests originated after Riverpoint activity was flagged." Operations frowned. That would imply someone tried to suppress emerging performance. The CFO exhaled. "Which exposes us, Not morally, legally, outside the room. Phones vibrated. Somewhere else in the building. Conversations were being rerouted. Calendars adjusted. People learning they were no longer part of decisions they thought they controlled. The CFO looked at me. "You didn't ask for permission." "No," I said. "I asked for accountability." Another pause. "Why didn't you resign when the branch was reassigned?" he asked. "Because resignation would have confirmed their story." I replied, that Northfield was irrelevant, that the data didn't matter. Operations nodded once. "And now," I said. "Northfield matters whether anyone likes it or not." The meeting ended without resolution. That was the point. By the next morning, the internal memo circulated quietly. Regional strategy review initiated. Temporary leadership reassignment, pending findings. No names, no explanations, but everyone understood. Karen called me, voice unsteady. They pulled him from the regional call. No notice. I closed my eyes briefly. Good. Later that day, another message arrived, this one from operations. "We're considering alternative structures for River Point. Would you be open to discussing?" I didn't reply immediately, because this wasn't about a role. It was about leverage. And leverage only works when you let others realize they need you more than you need them. The board didn't fire him that week. They didn't have to. They just stopped protecting him. And that was enough. The change didn't arrive with an announcement. It arrived as absence. His name stopped appearing on emails. Meetings went on without him. Decisions that used to bottleneck at his approval moved forward quietly, efficiently, as if a handbrake had been released. No one said he was gone. They just stopped waiting for him. At Northfield, the audit wrapped up faster than expected. The team was polite, thorough, almost apologetic. Nothing further required. The lead auditor said as she packed her folder, "Your documentation was comprehensive." That word again, by midweek. Karen forwarded me an internal update she wasn't supposed to see. Regional consolidation strategy suspended pending review. River Point Market under independent evaluation. Suspended didn't mean canceled, but it meant exposed. I was invited to another meeting. This one larger. This one official. Same floor, different room. The CFO opened without preamble. "We're restructuring how we approach emerging commercial districts." Operations followed. River Point will pilot a decentralized model, local authority, faster approvals, legal added carefully, with safeguards. They all looked at me. "We'd like you to lead the transition." The CFO said, "Interim, advisory, however you want to define it." I didn't answer immediately. "Northfield," I asked instead. Operations nodded. Closure rescinded. Karen's voice shook when I told her. The others didn't speak at first. Then someone laughed short. Disbelieving. Someone else sat down heavily. "But what about him?" one of them asked quietly. I didn't have an answer, because accountability doesn't always look the way people expect. That Friday, I learned what had happened. Not from a memo. From an empty office. His nameplate was gone, personal items removed, the door unlocked but unused. Someone had wiped the whiteboard clean. Later, a colleague explained it simply. He's on leave. Indefinite. No escort. No announcement. No apology tour. Just distance. And distance, in a company like Meridian, was a verdict. The River Point announcement came the following Monday. Not flashy. No press. Just a quiet line in the earnings update about unexpected growth opportunities, identified through localized leadership. I stood at the back of the room as executives nodded along. No one mentioned Northfield by name. They didn't need to. Afterward, the CFO found me near the elevator. "You know," he said evenly, "this didn't go the way he expected." I met his eyes. It rarely does. He hesitated. "You understand this won't be framed as a mistake." "I understand," I replied. "It will be framed as evolution." He smiled thinly. Exactly. That night, I walked past Northfield Branch. The lights were on, the sign steady. Inside, the team was still working. Not because they were fighting anymore, but because they'd been seen. Northfield didn't reopen with a ribbon. There was no ceremony, no press release, no congratulatory email blast congratulating leadership for bold vision. It simply resumed. The same doors, the same desks, the same 5 people, except now. They weren't waiting to be closed. They were working with intent. Authority moved closer to the ground. Decisions happened in hours instead of weeks. The quiet friction that had once defined this place was gone. River Point followed quickly, not as a shiny flagship, but as a model. Local discretion, direct relationships, measurable accountability. The kind of structure that doesn't photograph well but performs. I took the interim role, on my terms. No corner office, no grand title, just the mandate to build what had been ignored and to document everything so it couldn't be buried again. Karen became branch lead officially. Raj moved into business development, where he belonged years ago. The younger associates stayed not out of fear anymore, but choice. The first quarterly numbers surprised everyone who pretended not to expect them. River Point outperformed projections. Northfield exceeded retention targets. Customer acquisition costs dropped sharply. No one asked how. They asked who else could replicate it. As for him, there was no dramatic reckoning, no farewell email, no apology, no admission of error. His absence became permanent the way some things do in corporations, quietly, efficiently, without acknowledgement. His strategy was revised, his decisions recontextualized, his name stopped coming up. People like to imagine accountability as confrontation. In reality, it's removal. One afternoon, months later, I found the original transfer letter in a folder I hadn't opened in a while. The same one he'd thrown across my desk. The edges were creased, the ink unremarkable. 15 days. That was all it took. Not because I was exceptional, but because the system had been counting on silence, on compliance, on the assumption that no one would look too closely at what was being erased. I didn't win by fighting harder. I won by documenting better, by understanding that power isn't loud, it's positioned, and that deadlines can be weapons if you refuse to panic. Northfield stands today not as a miracle, but as proof that failure can be manufactured, proof that opportunity is often inconvenient, proof that being relocated doesn't mean being removed unless you agree to it. If this story stayed with you, maybe it touched something familiar, a moment when you were moved aside instead of listened to, written off instead of understood. Wherever you're listening from, I hope this reminded you of something important. In the end, I realized the branch was never the problem. Neither was I. The silence was, and once that broke, everything else followed. Because sometimes, the most powerful comeback doesn't announce itself at all. Looking back, I realized the biggest lesson isn't about winning against someone, but about not letting yourself disappear just because others want you to be silent. There are times in life when you're not defeated by failure, but by being underestimated. And if you believe that long enough, you'll shrink yourself without anyone needing to intervene. I once stood on that edge, but instead of leaving, I chose to stay a little longer long enough to see clearly who I am. What about you? How do you feel after hearing this? Is there any moment in the story that resonates with you, or evokes a personal experience? If you could change one detail in this story, what would you change? Or do you have any other suggestions for the protagonist to rediscover themselves through a different path? Please let me know where you heard this story. I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments. If this story resonates with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it today, and subscribe to the channel to follow the next stories, because sometimes, just one timely story is enough to help us stand tall again. I once thought being reassigned to a branch that was about to close was the worst moment of my career. But that wasn't when I lost everything. Months later, while I was in the air, flying across 3 continents to finalize the biggest deal of my life, a brief email arrived and everything fell apart in silence. The story begins at an altitude of 35,000 feet, where no one hears you being fired, but the whole world is about to feel the consequences. The first sound wasn't his voice. It was the sharp crack of a folder snapping shut. Then came the words that cleaved the air like glass breaking. Effective immediately. Davina West, Chief Systems Architect, is terminated. For a heartbeat, the boardroom held its breath. Charts froze on the projector. Pens hovered above notebooks. No one blinked. And at the head of the table, Marcus Hale, our newly crowned Chief Executive Officer, delivered my execution with the calm detachment of a surgeon. He didn't flinch. He didn't even look at me. To him, I was an obstacle, not a person. I felt the blood rise hot behind my ears. 6 years of building Apex Nova's modular platform, line by line, clause by clause, reduced to a single sentence. The humiliation wasn't private. It was a spectacle. Every director, every vice president in the room, watched as I was erased. And still, I didn't give Marcus the satisfaction of outrage. I simply gathered my notes, lifted my chin, and whispered one word that unsettled the silence. Thank you. A few people shifted uncomfortably, mistaking it for surrender. But it wasn't. They didn't know what I knew. How are you doing today? Did you manage to step away from the screen for a second? Maybe just look out the window at the sky and remind yourself there's a bigger world beyond deadlines before diving into this chaos with me? I'd love to know where you're watching from, if this story has already pulled you in. A quick tap on the like button and hitting subscribe means a lot. It's free. It helps us keep telling these stories every day. I had been more than a title on an org chart. As Chief Systems Architect, I had been the spine of this company. I was the one who negotiated survival when budgets collapsed, the one who coded through blackouts, the one who made Apex Nova's $180 million flagship platform possible. I carried the late nights, the skipped family milestones, the endless fight to prove that work done in a cramped lab mattered more than empty speeches upstairs. Marcus had none of that weight. His resume was slides and sound bites, polished in consulting firms where nothing real was ever built. He strutted into the CEO's chair armed with jargon, synergy, streamlining, low-hanging fruit, as though words could replace the years I had carved into steel and silicon. He was a man intoxicated by titles, blind to the substance beneath them. That morning crystallized the truth. Marcus believed firing me was efficiency. He thought he had won. But while the board stared at me like a casualty, I felt something sharper than despair. Certainty. The certainty that I had prepared for this very betrayal. And Marcus Hale, CEO or not, had no idea how much power he had just handed back to me. The silence after my firing followed me like a shadow. It stretched down the hallway, into the elevator, and out into the parking lot where I sat gripping my steering wheel long after the engine should have started. For 6 years, I had been the anchor, the one who steadied the storm. And in less than a minute, Marcus Hale, the new CEO, had cut me loose in front of the very people who once praised me as indispensable. What I didn't expect was how quickly the chaos would ripple through the team. By the next morning, my phone lit up with messages, not of support, but of confusion. Logan wrote, "Are we even allowed to keep working on the code?" Priya added, "HR says everything is paused until new leadership is confirmed." Dylan, ever the cynic, simply messaged, "Guess we're disposable after all." Their words bled with exhaustion and disbelief. These were some of the brightest engineers I had ever worked with, and they suddenly sounded like soldiers abandoned mid-battle. I stared at each text, my chest tightening. The emptiness was unbearable. I had fought so hard to protect them, to carve out a space where creativity thrived, where deadlines didn't kill souls. Now they were drifting, untethered, questioning whether their careers had collapsed overnight because of one executive's arrogance. I felt guilt gnaw at me. Had I failed them? Had my silence in that boardroom condemned us all? Doubt seeped into every corner of my thoughts. I replayed the moment I whispered "thank you" over and over, wondering if it sounded cowardly, if they believed I had simply accepted defeat. For the first time in years, I questioned my own instincts. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe leadership could be replaced by someone with the right smile and the right connections. Then, at 3 in the afternoon, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Jason, the intern. He wasn't supposed to know anything beyond QA protocols and bug reports. His text was short, almost casual. "They don't know who holds the original patent, do they?" I froze. My heart thudded in my chest. Of all people, Jason had glimpsed the truth. The silence that had felt like a tomb suddenly cracked open. He was right. They didn't know. Marcus didn't know. The board didn't know. Not one of them understood that during the budget cuts 2 years earlier, I had secured the modular patent under a separate entity. Redline Systems. My entity. The original design. The licensing rights. The framework that powered everything. They weren't sitting in Apex Nova's vaults. They were sitting in mine. For a moment, the emptiness eased, doubt still lingered. But beneath it sparked something I hadn't felt since the firing. Leverage. Jason's question reminded me that the game wasn't over. In fact, it had barely begun. That night, my apartment looked more like an evidence locker than a home. Contracts, binders, and scribbled notes were stacked high across the kitchen table, spilling onto the floor in uneven piles. The lamp above me flickered, casting long shadows over the mess. I could almost hear Marcus Hale in his glass-walled penthouse across town, sipping something expensive while rehearsing sound bites for tomorrow's investor call. He had the skyline. I had peeling paint and papers stained with coffee rings. The contrast was almost comical. I sat there in my chair, wrapped in silence, the kind of silence that presses against your chest and makes the air feel heavier than it should. My phone buzzed occasionally, with another anxious message from one of the engineers. But I didn't answer. I didn't have comfort to give. All I had were the files I'd dragged out of storage boxes, remnants of every contract negotiation, every budget meeting, every moment I'd fought tooth and nail to keep our project alive. The loneliness was sharp. I had given years of my life to Apex Nova, and in return, I was discarded like a worn-out circuit board. The thought clawed at me. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was done. But every time that doubt whispered, another voice pushed back, the one that had kept me awake through all-nighters, the one that had fought through budget cuts, the one that refused to let my work vanish under someone else's name. My eyes burned as I flipped through folder after folder. It felt pointless, like digging through ashes, until I opened one yellowed envelope tucked beneath a stack of old quarterly reports. Inside was a printed email, time-stamped 2 years earlier. I remembered it instantly. Finance had announced a budget realignment. Translation: our team was about to be gutted. That was the night I had stayed up until dawn drafting an alternate plan, one that routed our modular system through a separate legal entity. My pulse quickened as I read the words again, this time slower, letting each sentence cut through the fog of exhaustion. Buried halfway down the email was a clause so ordinary it almost looked harmless. In the event of termination of project funding or leadership oversight, all rights revert to the original architect until full reintegration. I set the paper down, my hands trembling. That was it. That was the thread no one else had noticed. Marcus thought stripping me of my title gave him control. He thought public humiliation erased years of preparation. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that their act of cutting me off had triggered the very clause that placed the patent squarely back in my hands. The room was still small, still cluttered, still suffocating. But suddenly, it felt less like a prison and more like a command center. Alone. Yes. Exhausted. Absolutely. Yet beneath the ache sat something harder, sharper: resolve. They had just handed me the key. The first crack in Marcus Hale's empire arrived on a Thursday morning, precisely 9 days after my firing. I wasn't there in person, but I didn't need to be. Word travels fast in tech. Faster still when something goes wrong in front of money. The investors had flown in from 3 cities, squeezed into Apex Nova's sleek glass auditorium for the highly choreographed product demo. Marcus had promised them a flawless performance, the kind of show that convinces cautious men in suits to loosen the strings on billion-dollar checks. Instead, what they got was silence. The demo dashboard lit up, then flickered, then froze on a single line of text glowing in sterile gray across a white screen. License authorization expired. At first, no one seemed to understand what it meant. The room buzzed with polite confusion, the kind that usually smooths over small technical glitches. Marcus forced a laugh, the kind that stretched too thin, and waved to the engineering team at the back. "Just a hiccup," he called out. 2 minutes? But 2 minutes turned into 10. 10 into 20. Every click produced the same result. License authorization expired. I was at home, in my cramped apartment, watching the updates roll in through a private Slack channel my old team still hadn't removed me from. Logan typed, "They're sweating. Ops can't access staging." Priya added a single emoji. A lock. I leaned back in my chair, the corners of my mouth tugging upward despite myself. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. The slip. In the middle of the confusion. Ellen, the director of operations, raised her voice over the hum of nervous whispers. "Wait," she said, holding a tablet aloft. "Are we saying we've actually lost control of the platform?" The words sliced through the room. Investors turned their heads in unison, eyes narrowing. Marcus's smile cracked, the carefully polished mask faltering, for the first time. He looked less like a CEO and more like a child who'd been caught stealing from the cookie jar. "Of course not," he stammered, tugging at his cufflinks. "We have redundancies. Everything is fine." But his voice betrayed him. It wavered on the last syllable, just enough to send a ripple of doubt through the crowd. I imagined him then, standing in his tailored suit under the harsh auditorium lights, sweat gathering beneath his collar, while executives whispered and investors checked their watches. And me? I sat miles away, in a second-hand chair at a cluttered table, feeling a quiet current of triumph pulse through my veins. This was the power of preparation, the reward for reading every line of every contract when no one else bothered. They thought my firing had ended the story. What they didn't realize was that cutting me loose had triggered the very clause that turned the system into a locked vault, one only I could open. I didn't gloat aloud. I didn't post cryptic messages online. I simply folded my arms, breathed in the silence of my apartment, and let the satisfaction settle deep in my chest. For the first time since that boardroom ambush, I didn't feel erased. I felt inevitable. Tell me, which moment hit you hardest so far, the system freezing in front of investors, or the look on Marcus's face when Ellen asked if they'd lost control? And what kind of ending do you hope to see? Drop your thoughts below. I read every single one. Stay with me, because the story isn't done yet. The next twist will be even sharper. The day after the demo collapsed, my phone rang with a number I recognized immediately: Human Resources. I almost didn't answer. Part of me wanted to let it buzz into silence, to remind them that I owed them nothing. But curiosity tugged harder. What excuse would they spin now? "Davina," the voice chirped, polished and overly cheerful. "How are you holding up? We've been so concerned." Concerned. The word landed like a joke. Where was their concern when Marcus cut me down in front of the board? Where was it when the team spiraled into panic, when the system began slipping through their fingers? I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, not out of need, but out of control. "I'm fine," I said flatly. "Good. Good." The rep rushed on, as if afraid I'd hang up. Listen, the last few days have been challenging, but leadership has been talking, and we feel it would be mutually beneficial if you came back. We'd love to restore continuity. I closed my eyes, letting the words wash over me. Mutually beneficial. Restore continuity. Pretty phrases wrapped around desperation. They weren't calling because they valued me. They were calling because they were drowning. I pictured Marcus pacing in his corner office, demanding HR fix this mess. They probably rehearsed this call, choosing phrases that sounded warm but not apologetic, urgent but not desperate. What they didn't realize was that every syllable dripped with fear. I kept my voice even. You want me back? Well, yes, she said quickly. The investors are unsettled, and the team clearly respects you. This is about stability, of course. We'd be happy to discuss adjustments to your compensation. And there it was. The bait, money, the universal bandage they thought could patch any wound. They believed I could be bought, that my silence, my loyalty, my architecture could be sold back to them with the right number of zeros. I almost laughed. Instead, I let the silence stretch until she shifted uncomfortably. Then I spoke, slowly, carefully, each word sharpened to a blade. You don't have enough money, I said. She stammered. I'm sorry? You don't have enough money to buy back the truth, I continued. Not the sleepless nights. Not the years I spent protecting a system your executives never understood. Not the patent you tried to bury. And certainly not my silence. The line went quiet. I could hear her breathing, quick and shallow, searching for a script that didn't exist. For the first time since Marcus's ambush, I felt no trace of doubt, only clarity. They wanted me back because they finally understood. The foundation was mine, not theirs. I ended the call before she could recover. No shouting, no gloating, just a clean break. My voice steady, my hands calm. They thought power lived in the CEO's office. But that day, I knew the truth. Power lived in the refusal to be bought. 2 days after I hung up on HR, an email slipped into my inbox with a subject line that made me pause. Invitation to discuss strategic alignment. The sender wasn't Apex Nova. It was a name I hadn't seen in years. Ardent Dynamics, one of our fiercest competitors. I stared at it for a long minute, my finger hovering over delete. It smelled too convenient, too perfectly timed. The system had barely stumbled. The board was scrambling. And now a rival wanted a conversation? Red flags everywhere. Still, curiosity is a stubborn thing. I opened it. The message was short, almost cryptic. We understand the current turbulence. If you're open to dialogue, we'd like to meet? C. Dalton. Chris Dalton. The name hit me like a memory jolt. He had been one of ours once, a senior engineer with a sharp mind and sharper tongue. Years ago, Marcus had dismissed him in a restructuring, calling him unmanageable. Chris had laughed bitterly, said Marcus wouldn't know innovation if it bit him, and walked out. Now here he was, representing Ardent. My instinct screamed caution. Rivals don't reach out of kindness. They reach for leverage. Still, I agreed to coffee in a quiet cafe on the edge of downtown, the kind of place where the music was too soft and the waitstaff didn't eavesdrop. Chris looked older, lines carved around his eyes, but his grin was the same, half amusement, half challenge. Davina West, he said, sliding into the booth across from me. Didn't think I'd see the day you'd be on the outside looking in? Life surprises, I answered evenly. He chuckled. Marcus always did have a talent for driving out the ones who actually matter. First me, now you. Though I'd say you built a hell of a lot more before he shoved you aside. I studied him, searching for the angle. You didn't ask me here to reminisce. You're right, Chris said, leaning in. Ardent wants what you built. We've followed the fallout. Investors whisper, clients doubt. But you and I both know the system doesn't move without you. My pulse quickened, but I kept my expression still. What makes you so sure? That grin again. Sharper this time. He pulled a tablet from his bag, slid it across. On the screen was a copy of the Apex Nova licensing document, the same contract I had drafted 2 years earlier. He tapped a clause highlighted in yellow. Marcus doesn't know, does he? That you're the only one who can activate the modules. Without you, it's just a shell. For a moment, the cafe noise dimmed, as if the world held its breath. I glanced at the words I already knew by heart. Clause 7.2.1. The oversight clause. My clause. Chris sat back, satisfied. So, Davina, the question isn't whether the system works. It's whether you want it to work, for them or for someone else. I sipped my coffee, masking the storm inside, caution coiled tight around my ribs. But beneath it, curiosity flickered, for the first time. Someone outside Apex Nova spoke the truth aloud, and that changed everything. The morning headlines almost made me laugh. Apex Nova restores stability, system back online. Marcus must have fed the story to the press himself, plastering his face across every outlet as the savior who tamed the storm. He strutted before the board that day, declaring the system fully restored thanks to the heroic efforts of DevOps. He spoke in clipped confidence, his voice full of authority, as if the clause I had written 2 years earlier didn't exist. For a few hours, people believed him. The board stopped panicking, investors relaxed, and even some of my old team messaged me in confusion. Did he actually fix it? Logan asked. Priya sent a question mark. Nothing more. I stared at the screen, my stomach tight. Marcus was playing with illusions, and illusions can be dangerous if left unchallenged. But I knew better. A system isn't restored by ignoring contracts or pretending licenses don't matter. Whatever he was running was a facade, a hollow shell designed to fool those who didn't know where to look. And then, less than 24 hours later, it happened. At exactly 9:17 a.m., the system collapsed again. Not a hiccup. Not a temporary freeze. Complete failure. Demo environments. Client sandboxes. Even the investor testbed went dark. Screens across the building lit up with the same line of text I had seen before. License authorization expired. Inside Apex Nova's offices. Panic erupted. I heard about it through Dylan, who sent me a frantic message. He's losing it. They can't access anything, not even staging. By mid-morning, the news had already leaked. Reporters who had praised Marcus hours earlier were now circling like sharks, questioning how a supposedly restored platform could fail again so catastrophically. In the boardroom, chaos reigned. Marcus tried to bluff, shouting about sabotage and technical glitches. But the faces staring back at him weren't buying it anymore. Someone demanded proof. Someone else demanded logs. That's when the truth cracked open. The so-called fix he had paraded was nothing more than a shallow demo environment. No real functionality. No legal authorization. Nothing sustainable. A senior director finally said it aloud. You misled us. This wasn't a restoration. It was theater. Marcus's face drained of color. The board's patience, already thin, snapped. Investors began pulling calls. Partners froze negotiations. The man who had sauntered into his CEO role, full of swagger, now looked like a cornered animal, eyes darting, sweat gathering along his collar. I sat in my apartment, watching it unfold in real time through updates and whispers, the chaos rippling outward. And for the first time, it wasn't my chaos to carry. It was his. The system was doing exactly what it was designed to do, protect itself from hands that didn't belong. And Marcus Hale had just been unmasked as a fraud in front of everyone who once believed him. When the call from the board came, I wasn't surprised. The system's second collapse had left them with no choice. What did surprise me was how quickly the tone shifted, from dismissive to desperate. They wanted me in the executive chamber by morning. I arrived early, walking past glass walls where employees pretended not to stare. The air felt charged, like everyone was waiting for a verdict. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was brittle. Half the directors were red-faced with frustration, the other half pale with fear. And Marcus Hale, the man who had humiliated me in front of this very table, stood near the doorway like a guard dog trembling on its leash. "Davina," he began, voice cracking just enough to betray him. "There's no need for this. The situation is under control. We don't—" "Sit down, Marcus," one of the directors snapped. He flinched, but didn't move. I didn't spare him a glance. My focus was on the long table, the rows of faces suddenly stripped of arrogance. "Thank you for coming," the chairman said carefully, as if each word might fracture. "We'd like to discuss a path forward." I placed my folder on the table, deliberately calm. "I'm not here to ask for my job back," I said. "Let's make that clear." A murmur swept the room. They expected bargaining, maybe an apology, maybe a demand for compensation. Instead, I kept my voice level, my gaze steady. "I will not return to Apex Nova. I will not restore your access. What I will do is sell the patent." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut skin. One director dropped his pen. Another inhaled too loudly. The chairman's jaw locked, struggling to process what he had just heard. Marcus finally found his voice, almost shrieking. "You can't! You don't have the authority!" But the documents in front of me said otherwise. Their signatures, their approvals, their oversight lapses, every detail etched into black and white. The truth was undeniable, and they knew it. I leaned back in my chair, the chill of my certainty filling the room. This isn't a negotiation, it's an outcome. The boardroom's shock still lingered in my mind when I stepped into the marble lobby of Ardent Dynamics 2 days later. The air smelled of polished ambition, new carpets, fresh paint, the quiet hum of people who weren't scrambling to cover up a collapse, for the first time since Marcus had cut me down. I walked into a room not as a cast-off, but as the person holding the keys. Chris Dalton was waiting, the same sharp grin on his face. He didn't bother with small talk. "They know you won," he said. "The only question left is whether you'll let them live with the ruins, or let us build something better." In the conference room upstairs, the contract lay open, numbers written so large they almost looked unreal. $1.1 billion. My name, printed neatly at the top, no longer attached to Apex Nova, but to me, alone. Signing it would mean cutting the last tie, ending the sleepless nights spent fighting for a company that had discarded me. I let my hand hover over the page. Money wasn't the problem, power rarely is. What gnawed at me was purpose. I hadn't poured years of my life into code, just to see it twisted into a weapon of greed, no matter which corporation held the reins. So, I made a choice. With Chris watching, I slid a second page across the table, my clause, my condition. The system would be sold. Yes, but only with one stipulation. I would serve as chief advisory architect, not an employee, not a figurehead, but the guardian of how the technology was used. Chris raised his brows, then slowly nodded. "Protecting your work, even after you walk away." I should have expected nothing less. When the pen finally touched paper, a weight lifted from my chest. Liberation didn't come in the form of numbers on a check. It came in reclaiming ownership over my creation, in choosing who deserved it and on what terms. I signed with steady hands, decisive and calm. Apex Nova had tried to erase me. Instead, I had written myself into history on my own terms. 14 days. That's all it took for Apex Nova to unravel. The headlines hit first. Patent lost. Apex Nova collapses. Then came the numbers, brutal in their precision. The stock plummeted. Billions shaved off the company's value in a single morning. Partners fled. Contracts dissolved. And the empire Marcus Hale had boasted about crumbled under the weight of its own arrogance. The man who had once smirked while stripping me of my title was now reduced to a cautionary tale whispered across boardrooms. The CEO, who didn't read the fine print. I watched it unfold with a quiet sense of inevitability. The same people who had applauded my dismissal now scrambled to distance themselves from Marcus. Shareholders demanded his resignation, and the board, cornered by their own negligence, forced him out. The final image remains etched in my mind. A press conference, cameras flashing in a frenzy. Marcus sat off to the side, hollow-eyed, his tie loose, his shoulders slumped as though the air had been pulled from his lungs. For once, the man who thrived on spotlights shrank from them. And then there was me. I stepped into the glare of the cameras, my steps steady, my posture unbroken. The reporters shouted my name. The lenses followed my every move, and the contract waited before me. I lifted the pen. The weight of years condensed into that single moment. Flashbulbs ignited, bathing me in light, and for the first time in a long time, I felt nothing pulling me down. No shame, no doubt. Only pride, sharp and blazing. I said thank you, I told them softly, because that was the moment they handed me all the power. The silence that followed was heavier than applause, because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't shouting or breaking or burning bridges. It's standing tall when they expect you to fall. It's rewriting the ending in your own hand. And if this story struck something in you, if you've ever been underestimated, pushed aside, or told you didn't matter, remember this. Your worth is not decided in someone else's boardroom. It's written in what you choose to build next. So tell me, what part of this journey moved you the most? And how do you imagine the ending should feel? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tap like. Share this story with someone who needs it. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story might just be yours. I used to think being marginalized by unreasonable decisions was the ultimate injustice. But sometimes, the downfall comes from an even more trivial reason: a party, an ego, and the perfect excuse to remove someone who wasn't part of the family. What they didn't expect was that, when the door closed, what I took with me wasn't resignation, but an algorithm that could change everything. And the story begins the moment I was fired for what seemed like the most insignificant thing. The words hit me like a glass shattering on marble. "You're done here!" Declan didn't even blink as he said it, his smirk cutting sharper than the termination letter in his hand. Around the boardroom, no one met my eyes. 8 years of building the backbone of their empire, wiped out because I missed a party. I walked out numb, clutching silence like armor, unaware this was the spark that would ignite everything. Hours earlier, I sat at my desk, staring at an email that seemed harmless enough. Mandatory attendance, Declan's birthday gala. I stared at it for a second too long, the glow of the screen reflecting off my empty coffee cup. Mandatory? For a birthday party? My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but I didn't reply. I had no time for champagne toasts and hollow speeches tonight. Not when the final line of code for a security algorithm worth nearly $1 billion was hanging on my screen like a heartbeat on a monitor. I'm Ember Calloway, lead systems architect. The woman they called the firewall with a pulse. For 8 years, I gave everything to this company: sleepless nights, weekends buried in server rooms, fixing vulnerabilities before anyone else even saw them, while others played politics. I built the shield that kept our empire from crumbling. Declan Ainsworth, on the other hand, built nothing. He's the CEO's golden nephew, parachuted into a vice president role with a resume thinner than the cocktail napkin his offer letter was probably written on. Charming, entitled, and obsessed with control. People whispered he had a short fuse, and a long memory for anyone who crossed him. My phone buzzed against the desk, snapping me out of my thoughts. One missed call from Mom. A text followed. "Sweetheart, will you make it for dinner tonight?" My chest tightened. She'd been in and out of the hospital for weeks. I typed back quickly. "Tomorrow, just need to finish this push." It wasn't a lie. This update wasn't just important, it was critical. The algorithm I designed wasn't a product. It was the backbone of our global security network. If I didn't close this patch tonight, the next board meeting could be a bloodbath. Another notification slid across my screen. A Slack message from a colleague. "Word is Declan hates anyone who skips his party. Says it's a loyalty test." I smirked. A loyalty test? I was loyal to the work, not the wine. I started typing a response when another ping landed like a warning shot. He was joking, or maybe not. Careful, Ember. I glanced at the time, 9:40 p.m. I turned back to my code. The party would come and go. But this system, this was everything. What I didn't know then was that one unanswered invitation would cost me everything by morning. At 9:15 a.m., I walked straight into an ambush. The executive boardroom was colder than usual, its glass walls reflecting a skyline that suddenly felt foreign to me. Declan Ainsworth stood in the center like he owned the building, his tailored navy suit sharp enough to slice through air, a smirk playing at his lips. Behind him sat his uncle, the CEO, arms folded, face carved from stone. Neither gesture nor word came from him. "Ember," Declan said, rolling my name slowly, like a taste he didn't like. "Thanks for coming on such short notice." I placed my hands on the back of a chair, waiting for context, instead. Declan straightened his tie, eyes glittering with something that wasn't professionalism. It was triumph. "As of this morning," he began, voice steady and cruelly calm. "Your employment is terminated, effective immediately." For a split second, the words didn't register. Terminated. My mind scrambled for reasons. Budget cuts, restructuring, a project gone wrong. But he kept talking, every syllable slicing into me like paper cuts. "You've demonstrated a lack of commitment," Declan continued, "missing last night's event. Not a good look for someone in your position. We need team players, people who fit our culture." My throat burned, but I didn't speak. Around us, silence swelled until it pressed against my ribs. Culture. I had carried this company on my back for 8 years, built the algorithm that kept their entire global network from collapsing. I had been the firewall, the anchor, the last line of defense. And now, I was being erased by someone whose biggest accomplishment was throwing his own birthday party. I swallowed the heat rising in my chest. One word, one outburst, and I'd lose any leverage I might still have. So, I smiled faintly, even as the room tilted beneath me. But inside, panic coiled tight. Mom's insurance depended on my job. Her latest hospital bill had drained most of my savings. Without coverage, every treatment would bleed me dry. Declan must have seen the flicker in my eyes because his smirk deepened. He leaned forward, resting both hands on the polished table, and delivered the line that would burn itself into my memory. "Don't," he said softly, "ever think you're more important than my family." It wasn't a warning. It was a declaration, a reminder that this wasn't about merit or contribution. It was about bloodlines, and I didn't share his. I gathered my things without a word. The chair's legs scraped softly against the floor, an ugly sound in the perfect silence. Declan didn't stop watching me, even as I reached the door. His smirk stayed, sharp as broken glass, and as I stepped out into the corridor, one thought detonated behind my eyes. You just made the cost of loyalty unbearable. Declan, and you're about to pay every cent. The envelope was waiting for me like a quiet execution order. It sat in the middle of my desk, cream-colored, company logo embossed, my name typed in bold. Beside it, my monitor displayed a stark white screen with one cold sentence in black. Your access has been revoked. 8 years of building the strongest security system in the industry, erased with a single line of text. Around me, the office hummed with forced normalcy, keyboards clacked, phones rang, but every pair of eyes refused to meet mine. People who once praised me for saving multi-million-dollar contracts suddenly found the floor tiles fascinating. Loyalty, I thought bitterly, was a currency that devalued overnight. I slid the envelope open. Termination agreement. 2 pages long. No thank you. No acknowledgement of the billion-dollar architecture I had designed. Just legal jargon and a final instruction. Return your badge by end of day. My fingers tightened on the paper, the edge biting into my skin. But I didn't let my hands shake. Inside, fire roared. Every late night, every holiday spent debugging code, every moment I sacrificed with my mother. They reduced it all to this envelope. I wanted to scream, to march back into that boardroom and throw the document in Declan's smug face, but I didn't. Outbursts don't win wars. Silence does. I packed slowly, each click of the keyboard echoing in my skull like a countdown. My colleagues whispered when they thought I couldn't hear. What happened? She didn't go to the party. A laugh somewhere behind me. I inhaled through my teeth and kept my eyes on the desk. The screen blinked again, this time. Not from IT. A text slid across the corner of my phone. Unknown number. 5 words. Leave the building. Cafe 27. And then, a name that stopped my breath. Jonas Wren. For a moment, the noise of the office blurred into static. Jonas, former CFO, architect of every major acquisition, the man who knew where the company buried its secrets. A year ago, he vanished after a quiet retirement. No farewell speech, no LinkedIn updates, just gone. My pulse thudded in my ears as I slipped the phone into my bag. I didn't hesitate, badge in hand, envelope tucked under my arm. I walked out without a word. The elevator doors closed, sealing in the whispers behind me. If Jonas Wren was reaching out now, it meant one thing: my story wasn't over. It was about to turn into something no Ainsworth heir could predict. The bell above the cafe door chimed as I stepped inside, still clutching the envelope like evidence of a crime. Cafe 27 was nearly empty, save for one man in a charcoal coat seated in the far corner. His silver hair caught the morning light streaming through the window, and when he looked up, his eyes were as sharp as I remembered. Jonas Wren hadn't aged so much as he had hardened. "Ember," he said, rising just enough to pull out the chair across from him. "Sit." I lowered myself onto the seat, heart pounding against my ribs. Jonas Wren, the man who once signed billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, who vanished overnight with whispers of a fallout that no one could confirm. And now, here he was, staring at me like he'd been waiting for this moment all along. "You're wondering why I called," he said, voice even, deliberate. I nodded because words felt too fragile. He leaned in, resting his elbows on the table. "Before I walked out of that building a year ago, I set something in motion. For you." My breath hitched. "For me?" Jonas smiled faintly, like a man savoring the punchline. "When you started building that algorithm, I knew its value, and I knew the people in charge wouldn't protect you if politics got ugly. So, we built a safety net." I stared at him, waiting for the catch. "A trust," he continued. "One that holds an LLC, Callaway Innovations. 6 months ago, you signed papers under the radar, remember? Buried in the compliance stack I gave you." I searched my memory, and then it hit me, that stack of legal documents Jonas insisted I review late one night. I thought it was routine IP protection. "If you ever left voluntarily, nothing changes," Jonas said. "But if you were removed without cause, the LLC assumes full ownership of your work. And guess what? Declan just triggered it. The room tilted. My throat went dry. You're saying... Jonas reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a small silver USB, and slid it across the table. The metal glinted like a loaded gun. Your system, your patents, your licensing keys, he said. All of it belongs to you, from this moment on. The company just shot itself in the foot. I closed my fingers around the drive, its weight electrifying in my palm. Jonas leaned back, eyes gleaming. Declan thought he humiliated you. Truth is, he just activated the clause we've kept buried for half a year. For the first time since this nightmare began. Something inside me flickered back to life. It wasn't rage anymore. It was hope. Sharp, dangerous hope. The cursor blinked on the screen. Steady as my breath, at least on the outside. From the corner booth of the cafe, I logged into a secure terminal and completed the transfer. 1 digital signature, 2-factor authentication, and 8 years of my life slid from their servers into the vault of Callaway Innovations, the LLC Jonas built to protect me. It was clinical, almost boring. But the weight behind that click was seismic. The algorithm wasn't theirs anymore. It was mine. A gust of chatter filled the cafe as 2 baristas swapped gossip near the counter. But I barely heard them. My phone buzzed with notifications, emails, Slack messages, fragments of disbelief traveling at light speed through the company. Did you hear? They fired her? The Ember Callaway? She practically built the backbone of our system. What were they thinking? I scrolled past the noise, my thumb steady while something volcanic churned underneath my ribs. My badge might be dead. My desk abandoned. But in a way, I'd never been more present. Another ping. This time, a social media post. Declan's smug face filled the screen, crystal glass in hand. Laughing with 2 executives like they'd just conquered Rome. The caption read, "Leadership is knowing who truly matters." Next, chapter, "Sack your family first." My jaw tightened. I stared at his words until they blurred, a bitter laugh curling in my throat. Leadership? Declan couldn't lead a line at a coffee cart. He didn't even realize the empire he was gloating over had just slipped through his fingers. I exhaled slowly, letting the fury simmer under a veneer of calm. Rage is a weapon, but only if you know when to draw it. Right now. My job was to stay invisible, methodical, patient. Then it happened. A soft chime from my laptop, followed by a string of alerts cascading like dominoes. At first glance, they looked routine, license notifications. But then the subject line hit me like music. System alert. Deployment license expired. Please contact Callaway Innovations to renew. The email wasn't just in my inbox. It was in every executive's, every VP, every director, every stakeholder who believed today was business as usual had just learned their flagship system was frozen in place. No updates, no patches, no expansion until they came knocking on my door. I closed the laptop, slid it into my bag, and took one last sip of lukewarm coffee. On the surface, I was calm. A woman finishing her drink before heading home. Inside, I was a storm biding its time, silent for now, but ready to tear the walls down, while I savored a quiet corner table and the last bite of a blueberry muffin. Chaos erupted 13 floors above me. The boardroom that once radiated power was now a pressure cooker. The CEO's voice thundered against glass walls, rattling pens in their trays. Declan stood rigid beside him, his bravado from last night's party curdling into panic. Sweat beaded at his hairline as the head of IT stammered through a slideshow filled with red error screens. "All global deployment functions are locked," the IT chief said, throat bobbing. "Every node requires a renewal key from Callaway Innovations." His eyes flicked toward Declan and dropped just as quickly, like the name itself was radioactive. Declan slammed a fist on the table. "She can't do this. She signed a standard work-for-hire agreement." The general counsel adjusted her glasses, her tone slicing through the room. "Actually, She didn't. Ember negotiated an IP carve-out clause tied to performance benchmarks, and she met all of them. Without her signature, you have no enforceable claim. The CEO's face blanched, then flushed an alarming shade of crimson. We paid her salary. We funded the infrastructure. That system belongs to us. Not according to the contracts, the lawyer replied coolly. And the patent filing? Already approved under the LLC. Legally, they own everything. A silence settled, thick as smoke, broken only when the CEO roared, "Get Jonas Wren on the phone. He'll know how to unwind this." Across the room, a junior aide scrambled to dial. Speaker mode crackled to life with a single ring. Then a voice, smooth, measured, unmistakable. "Jonas Wren speaking." "Jonas, thank God," the CEO barked. "We've got a situation with Ember. We need you." Jonas cut him off. His tone chilled steel. "A situation you created." Declan's head snapped up, color draining. "Jonas, listen." But Jonas didn't. "Here's my advice. Wish your legal team luck. You'll need it." A beat of silence. Then the click of a call ended. The CEO stared at the dead speaker, mouth working soundlessly, until the truth settled like a guillotine. The man he trusted had just aligned with the woman they cast out. While they spiraled, I leaned back in my chair at Cafe 27, scrolling through emails. More alerts confirmed what Jonas promised. The system was locked, airtight, waiting on my terms. My reflection in the cafe window looked calm, almost serene. No one could see the storm underneath, the one I'd learned to wield like a blade. Upstairs, they were screaming. Down here, I was smiling. By mid-afternoon, the company thought they'd found a lifeline. The emergency legal team crowded the boardroom, stacks of paper and open laptops littering the polished table. Declan sat at the head now, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up like a man on the brink of triumph. Or desperation. "We have a path," the general counsel announced, her voice carrying a note of brittle optimism. "If Ember hasn't filed a patent, we can submit an emergency application, given the system's commercial value. We could argue prior ownership through investment and resources. It's risky, but it might work." Declan's grin split wide, smug and sharp. "Finally! Someone earning their paycheck. Do it. File it now." Phones buzzed, keyboards clattered, and for a moment, the air in that glass tower tasted like victory, or what they thought victory felt like. Declan even laughed, a brittle sound that tried too hard to drown out the morning's panic. "See, I told you, she's smart, but she's not invincible. We'll bury her in paperwork before she can blink." If only he knew. At a quiet corner table downtown, I sipped my coffee as my phone vibrated. A push notification slid across the screen. Simple but devastating for them. USPTO filing confirmation. Patent number 11-90847 approved. Registered under Callaway Innovations LLC. I smiled. Slow and steady. Approved 2 weeks ago. Long before Declan even planned his little party. Jonas and I had built this net tight, months in advance. They weren't chasing a loophole. They were sprinting toward a brick wall. Seconds later, another alert lit up my screen. This one sweeter. Emergency filing rejected. Existing registration on record. Somewhere above me, in that sterile glass box. I imagined the moment hope curdled into fury. I pictured Declan reading those words, his victory speech dying in his throat as the weight of failure slammed down harder than gravity. I opened a secure chat with Jonas. E. They tried to file. J. And? I snapped a photo of the confirmation screen, captioned it with 2 words, "Already ours." Jonas's reply came fast. "Beautiful! Let them twist. Time to move to phase 2. I closed the app, slid my phone into my bag, and stood. Every movement calm, deliberate. They still thought this was salvageable, that a last-minute filing could save them. Let them. False hope was its own poison. And I had no intention of taking the antidote away just yet. For the first time all day, I felt something close to satisfaction. Not because I'd won, winning would come later. This was better. This was watching the other side celebrate on a battlefield they didn't realize they'd already lost. The email came through as I stepped out of the cab. Subject line: Strategic Opportunity. I opened it while the city roared around me, horns and footsteps blending into white noise. A major competitor, Helix Dynamics, wanted a meeting. Their tone was polite but urgent. They'd reviewed the public filings for Callaway Innovations LLC and were prepared to discuss a licensing deal in the mid-nine figures. Hundreds of millions for what the Ainsworth family thought they owned. I didn't hesitate. 10 minutes later, I confirmed. Time and location: the Grand Meridian Hotel. Ironically, the same five-star palace where Declan threw his victory party just 7 days ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. Inside, the lobby gleamed like polished gold, marble floors echoing under my heels. Cameras flashed near the entrance, financial journalists sniffing around after rumors of unrest at Ainsworth Global. I let my coat fall across my arm and walked with purpose. The photographers didn't know my name yet. They would. Helix's CEO greeted me in a private suite overlooking the skyline. "Ms. Callaway," he said, extending a hand. "We've been watching your work for years. What happened this week? Their loss, our gain." I smiled, small and controlled. "I'm not here to talk about the past," I replied. "I'm here to talk about numbers." Negotiations began, calm, measured, everything in writing, while lawyers scribbled notes and analysts crunched figures. I drafted an email on my phone with the same steady hands I used to build firewalls. 2. CEO's address. Subject: license renewal offer. Body: you have 48 hours. After that, the value of your company begins to evaporate. Choose wisely. I hit send. No threats, no drama. Just a deadline, and a truth they couldn't outrun. Across the suite, Helix's lead negotiator slid a term sheet toward me. Initial offer: $320 million, with options for expansion into 3 continents. I traced the bold numbers with my eyes, but kept my expression neutral. Control wasn't in the reaction, it was in the restraint. "We'll review," I said, standing. "But know this, I'm not in a rush. The longer this drags, the more leverage I have." When I left the suite, reporters swarmed near the elevators, their lenses clicking like gunfire. Someone whispered, "Is that Ember Callaway?" A question today, a headline tomorrow. Outside, the evening air bit cold against my skin. But inside, I burned steady, a controlled flame no one could extinguish. They thought they had humiliated me. Instead, they handed me the weapon, and now, I intended to use it with precision. They walked in like men, still pretending to own the room. The CEO's stride was stiff, his jaw locked tight. Beside him, Declan looked pale beneath his perfect tan, his arrogance reduced to a fragile shell. They spotted me at the center of the conference table, calm, poised, a glass of water untouched at my side. Jonas sat to my left, legs crossed, his presence radiating the quiet power of a man who knows the ending before anyone else does. He didn't rise to greet them. Neither did I. "Ember," the CEO said finally, voice tight as wire. "We're here to make this right." I tilted my head slightly. "Right for whom?" Declan leaned forward, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Look, let's not drag this out. We're prepared to—" Jonas cut in, his voice smooth and lethal. "Sit down." It wasn't a suggestion. They obeyed. That, in itself, felt like victory. Jonas reached into his leather briefcase, withdrew a thick document, and dropped it on the polished mahogany table with a sound that cracked like a gunshot. The CEO flinched. Declan's eyes darted to the bold header. Irrevocable trust agreement. Jonas spoke slowly, each word deliberate, savoring the silence between them. 6 months ago, This trust was executed under Delaware law. It holds one asset, Callaway Innovations LLC. And that LLC now owns every patent, every line of code you thought belonged to Ainsworth Global. The CEO's face drained of color. That's impossible. It's binding, Jonas said, his tone like cold steel. You signed the original carve-out clauses yourself. I advised you to protect Ember. Instead, you let nepotism make your decisions. His gaze slid to Declan. And for the first time, the boy who smirked at me across a boardroom looked small. Very small. This, Jonas continued, tapping the agreement with one manicured finger, is the price of arrogance. I warned you both. You chose family over competence, and now, your empire bleeds from that choice. Declan opened his mouth, but no sound came. The CEO slumped back in his chair, eyes glassy as the math hit him. $940 million. Gone. I leaned forward, folding my hands on the table. My voice was quiet, steady, every syllable honed like a blade. You didn't just fire me, gentlemen. You freed me. The CEO's breath hitched. Declan stared at the floor. And me? I sat there, serene on the surface, while a current of dark satisfaction surged beneath my skin. For the first time, they understood. I wasn't their liability anymore. I was their reckoning. The cameras flashed the moment I stepped into the room. The Grand Meridian's largest conference hall gleamed under chandelier light, its walls lined with journalists, analysts, and investors craning for a glimpse of the headline everyone had been whispering about. At the center of the stage, a long table draped in navy silk bore a single plaque in crisp black letters. Chief Innovation Officer, Ember Callaway. I paused for a heartbeat, letting the weight of those words settle in. Then I walked forward, every step measured, every click of my heels echoing like punctuation marks in a sentence I'd been writing for 8 years. Across the hall, lenses swung toward me, firing in rapid bursts. A week ago, I was a ghost slipping out of my former office with an envelope in hand. Today, I was the story. I sat, smoothing the fabric of my jacket, and lifted my eyes to the cameras. Their shutters clicked like applause. I remembered Declan's voice, smug and venomous across that boardroom table. Don't ever think you're more important than my family. I let the memory linger for a second, then smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of my lips. You were right, Declan, I murmured under my breath, knowing the microphones might catch it. Family is everything. Yours just lost it all to me. At the podium, Helix Dynamics CEO announced the news, a historic licensing agreement. Final valuation, $940 million. My algorithm, the system they tried to erase me for, now stood as the cornerstone of Helix's global expansion strategy. My name, not theirs, adorned every press release, every investor deck, every headline crawling across financial tickers, and as if the universe had a sense of humor. One headline broke live on the screens behind us. The heir who sank a fortune. The photo showed Declan leaving Ainsworth Global's glass tower. Jaw tight, suit rumpled, the weight of failure clinging to him like smoke. His arrogance had been their strategy, his pride, their executioner. I folded my hands on the table, feeling an unfamiliar lightness bloom in my chest. Liberation didn't roar. It whispered, quiet, steady, undeniable, for the first time in years. I wasn't defending something fragile. I was building something unstoppable. A reporter's voice cut through the hum. Ms. Callaway, how does it feel to hold the future of an entire industry in your hands? I looked straight into the nearest lens, my reflection glimmering in its dark glass. It feels, I said softly, like the beginning. The flashes erupted again, and somewhere deep inside, the storm I'd carried for months finally went still. I walked into that room thinking I'd lost everything, but sometimes losing what you thought defined you is the only way to discover what you're truly capable of. They underestimated me because I stayed quiet, because I didn't play their games. What they didn't know is that silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. If there's one thing I want you to take away from my story, it's this: your worth is never determined by the people who fail to see it. You are not disposable. You are not replaceable. And when the world tries to write you out of the story, that's your cue to pick up the pen and write the next chapter yourself. If this hit home for you, if you've ever been counted out, doubted, or pushed aside, drop a comment and tell me your story. Hit that like button if you believe in fighting back with brains, not just noise. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that their power isn't gone. It's just waiting. And if you want more stories like this, real, raw, and about winning on your own terms, make sure you subscribe. Because trust me, we're just getting started.